Welcome back. One of the things I fast discovered working for a Prime Minister is that much of your day is consumed looking after the urgent and the difficult issues that, if they were less complex, would have been dealt with by a department or indeed a minister's office. The fact that they ended up in the Prime Minister's office, on the Prime Minister's desk, meant that they were hard, or worse, they were intractable. And almost always they had become urgent due to the buck passing of others to go all the way up the line to the Prime Minister. In the media too, often it's the day's latest crisis that occupies the news cycle, so that the important issues get passed over because something more urgent takes our attention. Like the recent deaths of young people using drugs at so-called music festivals. I think they're drug festivals with a bit of music, but anyway. And the debate then we had about pill testing. We focused, but the news cycle moved on. And now that I think this is an issue that deserves a closer look, I want to come back to it tonight, particularly as we are seeing two elements of debate emerge. Some, as you know, are saying it's time to just accept the reality that more and more young people are doing drugs, so let's test them and let them use the drugs safely. That's the harm minimisation route. And last week, Sydney's Daily Telegraph newspaper even had claims of parents allowing their children to use cocaine in the family home. Then there's the alternative approach, a zero-tolerance approach, much like the Howard government's tough on drugs strategy that's now being looked at again, as many people with first-hand experience of the drug issue are saying that the lenient approach has failed. And we need to go back to policing, drug education, and appreciate that it's the harm and minimisation that's failed. Experts in this area, former New South Wales police officer and community campaigner Pat Daly, and the Daily Telegraph's parenting expert and author Dr Justin Coulson. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Pat, I'm going to start with you. You're saying that cocaine use is being normalised. How so?
Well, it's becoming normal because we're using the phrases party drugs, recreational drugs. It's just being accepted in the community, particularly in high socio-economic areas. And we have to call it out more. We have to send a message that drugs are dangerous and that if we normalise drugs, it's going to be a bad step for the community.
Dr Coulson, I mean, it's pretty tough to be a parent nowadays. You can give them all the messages you like to say that these are drugs you shouldn't go near. We know of many young people who often, on the first time they've tried some of these substances, have ended up in hospital or worse, they've lost their lives. But at the same time, there's this constant debate in the community, in the media, that we really need to go down a harm minimisation route, that we can make these illegal drugs safe. How do parents cope with that?
Well,
yeah, I think that the lawful issues are to one side of this conversation. The area that I think is most pertinent for the average person who's participating in a conversation like this, who has their own children, is, well, the politicians will work out the law and the law enforcement will look after that, but what do I do about my kids? And it seems that when we become forceful, when we become dogmatic, once we decide that, I'm the parent and the law is the law, research seems to suggest that we're going to push that unwanted behaviour underground. The best research that have globally seems to indicate that parents who spend time having healthy, considered conversations with their children from a young age about life generally, and as they get older about the more pressing issues around life, such as alcohol and other drugs, those are the parents who help their children to make up their own minds, to internalise their own values rather than have those values thrust upon them. In other words, when we encourage our children to, when we give our children autonomy rather than being ultra-controlling, we tend to get better outcomes. I recently completed a survey of close to 400 Australian teenage girls for a book that I'm currently working on. And one of the girls said something just brilliant that has become an integral part of what I'm writing about. She said, the stricter the parent, the sneakier the child. Stay woke. Woke obviously is an incorrect tense for stay awake. And what she's really saying is, parents, you've got to talk to your kids and engage them in conversations, not necessarily do this, so help me, if I ever catch you, there'll be trouble, because the kids say, don't worry, Mum, don't worry, Dad, you'll never catch me. But rather engaging them in conversations where we say, I read this article in the paper the other day about excessive drug use, or pills at festivals, or parents who are actually encouraging their kids to drink or even take pot or cocaine as substances to use at parties. How do you feel about that? Or any of your friends doing that? You know, engaging them in sensible conversations where they can start to make safe, healthy decisions for themselves without guidance. That would seem to be a better response.
Yeah, I think though there's a bit of a challenge, Justin. There's a bit of a challenge, and I'll go to Pat with this. You know, I'm in my mid-40s. I am of that generation that there was a lot of drug use available, certainly when I was at school and at university. I'm of that age now where, you know, my peers have children. So you have potential drug-using parents raising children quite normal, that mum and dad are smoking pot or using cocaine or taking ecstasy even. It's not necessarily the harder drugs. Can't forget ice, Pat Daly. Ice is huge in a lot of regional communities. What do we do about parents often being the bad role models to the kids?
Well, we're seeing a problem on the northern beaches of Sydney. I'm a Northern Beaches counsellor, and the police have recently written to all schools asking parents to do something about their children that are gathering in parks and around public places with social media gatherings, and they're polydrug using, and by that I mean using alcohol and drugs together. And that's what's causing so much violence in our community. And there's a message going out that it's okay to use drugs, but just be careful. The clear message has to be that there's no safe way to use drugs. Because if we clearly go down the harm minimisation path, which we're doing, we're going to have a situation where it's going to be much worse than alcohol, normalised drugs, so we must have harm prevention. We must stop it before it happens. We've done it with smoking. We've done it with drink driving in your studio there, or in a studio where I'm sitting here now. The staff, 20 years ago, they would have all been smoking. There would have been ashtrays everywhere, and if I would have said, oh, look, all this will stop, if I would have walked in 20 years ago, everybody would have fallen about laughing. But we've changed the whole culture with smoking. We've changed the whole culture with drink driving. And we can do the same with drugs. We just have to have the resolve. So I'm formally calling on Prime Minister Scott Morrison tonight to revisit the Howard strategies of tough on drugs, that's education, rehabilitation and enforcement, and to get back on track to do something about calling out the drug issue and sending out a clear message that we really have to do something about challenging communities, the police, who are now doing a very good job. When I was in the police, I saw the New South Wales police blown apart by drugs in the late 70s and 80s. We all know what happened with the CIB, with corruption and the like, but the police are now have tidied up their act. They're doing a great job in trying to call it out. We've seen operations in recent weeks in Sydney where they've simply been standing on street corners catching cocaine dealers. But as a community, we have to come alongside them. I had the privilege, when the police, of setting up Neighbourhood Watch, and we halved crime with Neighbourhood Watch. It's all about community policing, not just simply leaving everything to the police. As a community, we have to do something about it ourselves. When I was with the Salvation Army as media director, I had the privilege of working with Major Brian Waters, who set up the first advisory council on drugs, where you were involved under Prime Minister Howard, Peter, and then also with Tony Abbott. And we did something about it because we took a line on it, and it's called Tough Love.
Jeremy, do we see, do we see situations, Justin, where parents are supplying the drugs to their children, or are the kids getting their drugs from peer groups? And in the cases we just were discussing then about the northern beaches, they're congregating in public parks, etc., and sharing drugs?
Yeah, Peter, just briefly to answer that question, and then I want to refer back to something that Pat said. There's plenty of evidence that there are some parents, a very small proportion, but certainly some parents who are consuming drugs and even supplying them to their parents. We know that that's happening. I've sat with some children who have been, usually in their mid to late teens, who have been recipients of their parents' generosity around the supply of drugs. That does happen. Most parents are not doing that. Most parents are very sensible and having great conversations with their kids, but there is a small part of the population who sees things differently. The conversation, this is just such a fundamental challenge that we face. I agree with the goal, I agree with the outcome. I think that what we're trying to do here in this conversation is a good thing. But this idea that we can tell people that there is no safe way to take drugs and expect that they're going to listen is just... It's nonsense. And the reason it's nonsense is because there's a whole lot of adults out there. Well, there's a whole lot of adults out there tonight that are taking drugs and they think that it's absolutely safe to do it. In fact, they do it consistently. There are high-performing people who work in professional places right now who are taking drugs, I'm sure, as we speak. Beyond that, though, if you talk to a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kid and you say, there's no safe way to take these drugs, they'll say, yes, there is, because every Saturday night or every Friday night I go down to the park with my friends and I watch them do it, or I do it myself.
Yeah, but let me just jump in there. Justin, the lawyer in me says, we also say to people, there's no safe way to murder this country, has forever been illegal. You go back to when Adam was a boy, our humanity has been murdering people all the way through. We've always held that to be something that is not allowed. We've always had laws against it. It still happens.
Peter, I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to stop the drug use.
But we still fight. Same thing with rape. If you said to a young boy or young girl going out on a Saturday night, you know, you must have consent. You need to be very alive to the issues surrounding rape. Young people don't stop having sexual relationships, but of course we have a legal line there that we don't want them to cross. I don't understand why we can have a legal line with murder and rape, but because it's drug use, we don't have a legal line.
Well, they're fundamentally different in a variety of ways. But let's be clear. I'm not arguing that there should not be a line. I absolutely deeply believe that we need to do something, and I applaud Pat's call that we go back to policies that may have some impact. When we look at the data around this, the data is really confusing globally and in this country, so we need to be careful there. But if I address your specific argument, and that is that, you know, drawing this line in the sand, you can't tell a 15-year-old who's been drinking every week for the last 12 months that there's no safe way to do it, because they've not had any harm come to them at all as far as they can see. They've been going out and getting absolutely plastered with their buddies every Friday night and having an absolute ball doing it. Same with most of the kids that are going to the...
Why can't we tell them
Could I just come in there?
Why can't we tell them, Justin, that it's the law?
It doesn't mean that it's safe.
Why can't we tell them that it's the law?
No, well, absolutely.
I go back to my point.
So we need to tell them that it's not safe, and we need to tell them that it's the law.
We say to them, the law on murder is this. The law on rape is that. If we expect them to obey the law,
murder and rape
are
totally different to drug use. There's no correlation between those two things.
I disagree. Drug use and antisocial behaviour, they often go hand in glove. Pat Daly, do you want to respond?
They do often go hand in hand, but often they don't. There are many people who drink and take drugs that don't do anything antisocial, and they do it fun. Now, I'm not defending them. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good. I want to be clear on that. I think that it's a blight on society, and I want something done about it as much as both of you. But the idea that we can ram it down people's throats and say it's not safe doesn't work, because they're doing it every weekend and they believe it is safe. But they use a strategy.
But to use alcohol as an example is really not appropriate, because alcohol is legal, and we're seeing a great deal of, you know, I have a drink myself, I'm not being self-righteous, but we have to understand that if we normalise drugs, it's going to make alcohol look like an afternoon tea party, because with the salvos, I saw at the front line and people in addiction, and they say to a person, don't normalise drugs. You see where drugs are involved, the units, whatever, that where there's addiction, it comes first, second and third, and kids come a very poor last. At any one time, there's over 30,000 homeless children on our streets, and the vast majority of those are fleeing homes where there's addiction. We see the knock-on consequences of this. It's horrific. We see the drug ice. If we're going to normalise drugs, and we're going to normalise the drug ice, which is now devastating regional communities, particularly with Indigenous communities, the horrors of this really have only just started. So if we continue to go down this normalisation path, what we're saying is we should have prevention. It's better to prevent it and not to minimise it. Harm minimisation started under Neil Blewett when he was Health Minister under Bob Hawke, when they were combating HIV. And that was something that evolved but there are unintended consequences when we have needle distribution centres and like in methadone clinics and injecting rooms.
Pat, I need to interrupt you for a sec. You're mischaracterising I'm making. I'm not saying that we should go for harm minimisation, nor am I saying that we should legalise or normalise any of this. I'm actually saying precisely the same thing as you, except for the fact that I'm suggesting that when we try to ram a message down that there's no safe way to do this, when we try to tell people what they can and can't do and their experience is different, it goes over their head and we actually don't make any progress. We need to have much more nuanced, much more effective ways of letting people know that what they're doing is causing harm to themselves and others, because the ones who are doing it are not going to buy the message. We need to
All right,
communicate with them.
I'm going to have to leave it there.
Yeah, can I just say...
Gentlemen,
okay.
Pat, very quickly, I'm going to have to go.
Okay, Justin, I might say that, yes, education is the way to go. There's no doubt about it. We have to take away the demand. We can't arrest our way out of this, but enforcement certainly is an arm of it, and rehabilitation. I call on the government again. We really need to do something about it and coordinate the states. Thank you.
I have to say, and I get the last word because I'm the host, mixed messages from people in authority don't help either. Dr. Justin Coulson and Mr. Pat Daly, thanks very much for your time tonight. There you go. It's an issue you could talk about, and we should be talking about a lot more than we do just then, focusing on things like pill testing. Anyway, panel is up next.